The Mafia boss receives a call at 2 a.m., his ex in labor with his baby. Only he can save her. He once left her to die in the rain, but fate dragged him back to the hospital, only to find her fighting for life, carrying his child. Now, with her heart failing and his blood running through her veins, the most feared Mafia boss will learn some wars aren't fought with guns, but with love, guilt, and the price of redemption. The rain didn't fall. It attacked. Each drop struck the glass walls of Roman DeLuca's mansion like shards of ice, slicing through the stillness of the night. Beyond those walls, the city slept in shadows, unaware that somewhere inside, the most feared man in its underworld sat awake, lost between whiskey and regret. The storm howled through the cliffs of Ravenmoor, rattling the grand windows that overlooked the city he owned and the world he no longer felt part of. Roman sat in his study, his broad shoulders hunched under the dim glow of the desk lamp, staring at an untouched glass of scotch that had long turned warm. The clock ticked steadily, 2:06 a.m., when the shrill vibration of his phone pierced the room. He glanced at the screen, expecting it to be one of his men, another midnight emergency from his empire. But the number was unknown. He almost ignored it, until instinct whispered danger. The voice on the other end trembled, fragile and urgent. "Mr. DeLuca, this is Mercy Hospital." Her tone was hesitant, the kind that carried bad news before it was spoken. "We found your number listed as the emergency contact for Florina Evans. She's in labor, critical condition." For a moment, he forgot to breathe. The name hit him like a bullet through glass. Florina. It had been a year since he'd last spoken her name aloud. A year since he'd thrown her out of his life with words colder than the rain now falling outside. His fingers tightened around the phone as memories rushed back. Her pleading eyes, her voice cracking as she'd sworn she never betrayed him, and his silence that sealed their fate. The nurse's voice trembled through the static. "She's asking for no one, sir, but she's fading fast. Her blood type is rare, and the only compatible donor we traced is you." Roman's jaw locked, his muscles tensing like a man caught between fury and fear. He rose from his chair in one swift movement, the phone still pressed against his ear. The study suddenly felt too small, the walls closing in as thunder roared across the skyline. He stared at the rain hammering the window pane, each droplet reflecting fragments of her face. Florina's laughter, her tears, the way she'd said his name when she thought he loved her. The nurse continued, "If we don't act soon, Mr. DeLuca, she and the baby might not make it." The word shattered the last piece of stillness in him. Roman didn't respond. He simply ended the call, the screen dimming to black. His mind was chaos. He wasn't a man who panicked. He built an empire out of fire and blood. But something about that call stripped every layer of control he had built. He grabbed his keys from the mahogany table, his movement sharp, mechanical. On the shelf behind him, a framed photo caught his eye, the only trace of softness in the room. It was old, taken before everything went wrong. She was laughing in it, wearing his shirt, sunlight dancing across her hair. He had kept that photo hidden, telling himself he'd thrown it away long ago. His chest tightened painfully. He reached for his coat and gun, slipping both on like armor. The storm outside roared louder, as if mocking his silence. Every step he took echoed across the marble floor like footsteps towards something inevitable. His mansion, once a symbol of power, now felt like a cage built by his own hands. For years, Roman DeLuca had feared nothing. Not enemies, not death, not the sins he carried, but the idea of losing her again that haunted him. And tonight, fate had come knocking at the exact hour he'd stopped believing he still had a heart. The heavy doors swung open, and the wind hit him in the face, cold and sharp, carrying the scent of rain and regret. His car waited under the archway. headlights cutting through the downpour. The driver rushed forward, umbrella in hand, but Roman waved him off. The rain drenched him instantly, but he didn't care. It was almost poetic, nature's way of punishing him for every cruel word he had spoken. As he slid into the car, the storm intensified, lightning slicing through the dark sky like judgment. He barked an order, voice hard and cold. "Mercy, hospital, now!" The car sped through the sleeping city, the wet streets reflecting shards of neon. Roman's reflection in the window looked unfamiliar. Haunted, older, tired. He had seen death 1,000 times, caused it with his own hands. But tonight's fear was different. It wasn't the kind that clawed at your body. It was the kind that devoured your soul. He leaned back, closing his eyes for a brief second, but her voice echoed through the thunder. "One day, Roman, you'll regret letting me go." He had laughed back then, cruelly, thinking she was trying to guilt him. Now, that line pulsed through his veins like a curse coming true. He opened his eyes, watching the city blur past. Every building they passed felt like a reminder of the life he chose. Cold, ruthless, powerful. But all that power meant nothing if she was gone. His mind flashed back to the night he ended it. The rain had been the same, relentless. She'd stood on the porch, hair soaked, clutching her stomach as she begged him to listen. He'd turned away, believing lies whispered by his enemies, too proud to see the truth. The memory stabbed him deeper than any bullet ever could. His fingers drummed against the car door, impatience turning into panic. The driver glanced at him nervously through the mirror, but said nothing. Roman's face was carved in stone, but his eyes burned with something raw. Fear, guilt, longing. The phone buzzed again. It was the hospital. He hesitated before answering. The same nurse, more urgent now. "Mr. DeLuca, please, hurry, she's losing strength." His voice came out rough, barely human. "Keep her alive. I'm on my way." He hung up, staring at the rain. Outside, the storm seemed endless, each flash of lightning exposing the scars beneath his calm exterior. Roman DeLuca had faced wars, betrayals, assassins, but none of them terrified him like the thought of arriving too late. His chest felt tight, as if his heart itself was warning him that this night would change everything. He closed his eyes for a second, whispering under his breath, "Don't die hating me. Florina!" The wind howled in reply. As the car climbed the hill toward Mercy Hospital, the skyline disappeared behind the storm. The headlights caught glimpses of fallen branches, flooded streets, and flashes of emergency vehicles. Roman leaned forward, jaw tight, his hands curling into fists. Every instinct in him screamed control, but tonight, control meant nothing. All that mattered was her. The closer they got, the stronger the storm became, until it felt like the heavens themselves were testing his resolve. The wipers fought to keep the windshield clear, lightning flashing in staccato bursts that illuminated his face. Hard, shadowed, and unreadable. But his eyes betrayed him. They glimmered with something he hadn't felt in years, fear wrapped in love. And just when the hospital lights came into view, his phone buzzed again. A message this time. Unknown number. He opened it, and his breath caught. A blurry photo, a hospital bed, Florina's hand gripping the sheet. Underneath it, a message. "She's slipping." His pulse roared in his ears, louder than the storm. The car skidded as he barked at the driver to go faster, the tires slicing through water. His world had narrowed to one thought. Reach her before fate took everything left of him. The mansion, the empire, the blood on his hands, all meaningless now. Because if she died tonight, so would every reason he had to live. The thunder cracked again, shaking the earth, and in that instant, her final words from a year ago echoed clearer than ever. "One day, Roman, you'll regret letting me go." The words didn't just echo. they haunted, slicing through his chest as the hospital loomed ahead, a beacon in the dark. And somewhere deep inside him, he already knew. Tonight was the night that prophecy would come true. Her last words replayed in his mind, like a curse he could never escape. One day, Roman, you'll regret letting me go. And as the storm swallowed the city behind him, he finally did. The road of regret. The storm outside didn't ease. It grew angrier, as if the heavens themselves raged against him. The car tore through the soaked streets, tires slicing through pools of water that exploded in silver spray. Inside, Roman sat rigid, his knuckles white against the leather seat. The city blurred past like ghosts of the life he had built. Towers of glass, glowing signs, streets that once bowed to. Her final words from a year ago echoed clearer than ever. One day, Roman, you'll regret letting me go. The words didn't just echo. They haunted, slicing through his chest as the hospital loomed ahead, a beacon in the dark. And somewhere deep inside him he already knew. Tonight was the night that prophecy would come true. Her last words replayed in his mind like a curse he could never escape. One day, Roman, you'll regret letting me go. And as the storm swallowed the city behind him, he finally did. The road of regret. The storm outside didn't ease. It grew angrier as if the heavens themselves raged against him. The car tore through the soaked streets, tires slicing through pools of water that exploded in silver spray. Inside, Roman sat rigid, his knuckles white against the leather seat. The city blurred, past like ghosts of the life he had built. Towers of glass, glowing signs, streets that once bowed to his name. Yet for the first time, all that power felt like dust in his hands. The windshield wipers fought the rain, but the world ahead remained a trembling haze. Each flash of lightning lit his face for a fraction of a second. Sharp jaw, hard eyes, and that flicker of something no one in his world had ever seen. Fear. He gritted his teeth, forcing his mind to focus on the road, but it refused to obey. All he could see was Florina. Her face haunted the rain. Her laughter echoed between the thunderclaps. Every streetlight they passed reminded him of the way her eyes used to shine when she looked at him, before he became the monster she had to run from. He'd sworn he would never think of her again. He had buried her memory beneath deals, violence, and nights drowned in whiskey. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. He pressed a hand to his chest as if to still the storm raging inside him. His pulse hammered in his veins, matching the roar of the thunder. Every second felt like a countdown to a truth he wasn't ready to face. When he closed his eyes, he could still see that night, a year ago, the night she had told him the unthinkable. "I'm pregnant, Roman." Her voice had trembled, hopeful, fragile. He'd turned away, laughing bitterly, thinking it was a trap, another betrayal. He'd thrown his glass across the room, watching it shatter, as if breaking that glass could erase the fear clawing at his soul. He'd called her a liar. He'd told her she meant nothing. Now, those words returned, sharp and poisonous. Every syllable a dagger twisting inside him. He slammed his fist against the dashboard, startling his driver. "Faster!" he barked, his voice raw, breaking through the roar of the rain. But even as the driver pressed harder on the pedal, Roman couldn't sit still. The headlights cut through sheets of rain that looked like falling knives. The road ahead was slick, winding through the upper streets that led to the hospital on the cliffs. Suddenly, the car hit a curve too fast. Roman didn't care. He reached forward, grabbed the steering wheel himself, ignoring the driver's shout of protest. The tires screamed against the asphalt, the car fishtailing for a terrifying moment before catching traction again. "Sir!" the driver began, but Roman's glare silenced him. His hands gripped the wheel, veins standing out along his forearms. "If we're late," he growled, "she dies." Thunder split the sky, white light flooding the world for a heartbeat. In that flash, he saw Florina again, not the way she'd looked that last night, drenched and broken, but in the sunlight of the life they once could have had. The morning she'd made him coffee, laughing softly as she burned her fingers on the cup. The way she'd look at him when he came home, bruised and silent, as if she could see past every sin he carried. He had never told her he loved her, not once. The words had lived on his tongue, heavy and unsaid. Now, driving through hell itself, he wished he'd said them 1,000 times. The city began to thin, tall buildings giving way to the emptier, industrial stretch that led to the cliffs. The rain turned heavier, sheets of silver slamming the car like a punishment. Roman's jaw clenched. He could feel something inside him breaking, the armor he had built over years of being feared, collapsing under the weight of a single truth. He had loved her, still did, always had. Lightning tore across the horizon again, illuminating the black water below the cliff roads. Roman's mind spiraled back to the last time he saw her. She had stood at his door, her clothes soaked, mascara streaking her cheeks, eyes swollen from crying. "Roman, please," she had begged. "You know me. I would never betray you." He hadn't answered. He had turned his back. She had waited for him to stop her, but he never did. She'd walked away, and the sound of her sobs had haunted him long after the door shut. Now, as the thunder rolled, that same sound seemed to echo in his chest. The phone buzzed again, vibrating against the console. He grabbed it, swiping it open with trembling fingers. The same nurse's voice crackled through. "Mr. DeLuca, the hospital's power just went out. The generator's trying to restart, but she's still unstable. Please, hurry." He cursed under his breath, slamming the phone down. "Hold on, Florina," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "You're not dying tonight." His voice cracked on the last word, but he didn't care. The rain hammered harder, as if the world was collapsing around him. The car hit another sharp turn, the headlights catching a fallen branch. Roman swerved hard, missing it by inches. The driver shouted again, gripping the door, but Roman's focus never wavered. His heart pounded like a war drum. "Move!" he yelled as they came up behind a stalled truck blocking the road. The driver hesitated, but Roman's glare made the decision for him. They cut to the opposite lane, skimming the edge of the cliff. The car tilted slightly, the tires slipping before catching ground again. For a moment, it felt like flying over the edge, but Roman didn't slow. Water splashed against the windshield so thick that he could barely see. He didn't blink. His mind played cruel tricks. Florina's laughter turning into a scream. Her eyes fading in front of him, her hand slipping from his. He shook his head violently, forcing the visions away. "Not tonight," he muttered. "Not her." He drove faster, faster than he ever had. The lights of the hospital were faint glows in the distance, flickering in and out with the storm's fury. But to him, they were salvation, if he could just reach them in time. He felt something strange clawing up his throat, panic mixed with prayer. He hadn't prayed in years, not since the night his mother died. But tonight, the words rose unbidden. "Please, just let her live." As they neared the hospital gates, lightning flashed again, revealing chaos. Ambulances lined the entryway, sirens echoing weakly through the rain. People ran in shadows, nurses waving flashlights, power flickering on and off. Roman's car screeched to a halt near the emergency entrance. He shoved the door open before the driver could stop him. The rain hit him like bullets, soaking him instantly. He didn't care. He slammed the door shut, pulling his coat tight as he sprinted through the downpour. Every step felt heavier than the last. His shoes splashed through puddles, his breath turning sharp and ragged. The wind howled, the hospital looming ahead like a fortress of ghosts. But something was wrong. The lights went out completely for a moment. Only lightning lit the path, casting long shadows across the parking lot. He could see silhouettes moving frantically behind the glass doors, doctors shouting orders, the flash of stretchers being wheeled across hallways. He reached the doors and shoved them open. The scent of antiseptic and fear hit him instantly. Nurses rushed past him, their voices trembling as they called out instructions. "We're losing her!" someone shouted from down the corridor. Roman froze. The words seemed to punch the air from his lungs. He started moving before he even realized it, pushing through the crowd, his drenched shoes squeaking on the tiles. "Florina Evans!" he barked, his voice low and commanding. "Where is she?" The nurse at the counter looked up, startled. "Sir, you can't just—" His glare silenced her. "Where?" he repeated, sharper this time. "She's in operating room 3, the nurse stammered. "But the generator—" He didn't wait for her to finish. He turned, running down the corridor. The emergency lights flickered, red and white, painting the walls like a battlefield. Each flash revealed fragments of chaos. Doctors running, alarms blaring, the metallic scent of blood in the air. He reached the door marked O3, just as a team of nurses rushed out, panic written on their faces. "We're losing power again," one shouted. Roman's heart pounded. Inside, through the small window of the door, he could see her. Florina. Pale, fragile, surrounded by machines that beeped weakly, the monitors dimming with each flicker of light. Her hair was damp, her lips colourless, her body trembling as doctors worked frantically around her. Roman pressed his hand against the glass, his breath fogging the surface. For a second, the world stopped. Everything he had ever done, all the cruelty, all the mistakes, led him here. The woman he'd broken lay dying, and the only thing he could do was watch. A sudden explosion of sparks lit the hallway. The generator blew. The lights went black, alarms wailed. And through the dark glass, Roman saw Florina's body arch once, then fall still. The power of a name. Darkness swallowed the hospital whole. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. No sound, no breath, only the hum of silence broken by the storm outside. Then came chaos. Alarms shrieked back to life, red, warning lights flickered across the walls, and nurses' voices rose in panic. "We're losing her!" someone screamed from behind the glass door. Roman's heart pounded so violently he thought it might burst through his chest. Through the dim emergency light, he could barely make out Florina's silhouette, her body motionless, surrounded by frantic hands and failing machines. He slammed his palm against the glass, shouting her name. "Florina!" But his voice was swallowed by the noise, by the panic, by the darkness that seemed to close in from every side. The sound of flatlining monitors cut through the chaos, a piercing cry that tore straight through him. Without thinking, Roman shoved past 2 security guards who tried to block him. They reached for him, but one glare from the man who once ruled the city's underworld froze them in place. His presence was an iron storm. Uncontrollable, unstoppable. He burst through the operating room door, rainwater still dripping from his coat, the metallic scent of blood and antiseptic thick in the air. "Where is she?" he thundered, his voice slicing through the chaos. One of the surgeons looked up in shock, sweat running down his temple. "Sir, you can't be in here." Roman ignored him, his gaze locked on Florina, pale and trembling, tubes tangled around her fragile frame. "She's crashing," a nurse cried. "We're losing both, mother and baby." Roman's pulse turned to fire. "No," he whispered, more to himself than anyone. He looked around. The monitors were flickering weakly. The oxygen machine struggling to hum. The generator outside had failed completely. The hospital's backup system wasn't enough to sustain critical surgeries. Panic rippled through the staff. "She needs a full power restart," someone yelled. "Her oxygen's dropping." Roman's mind snapped into focus. Years of commanding under pressure kicked in. "Everyone, move!" he barked. "You," he pointed to a nurse, "keep her stable. You, call the main grid and tell them if power isn't back in 30 seconds, I'll personally own this damn hospital." The nurse stared wide-eyed. "Sir, that's not how it—" "Do it!" he roared. He pulled out his phone, fingers slick with rain and sweat. Dialing a number burned into his memory. "Vince," he growled when the line connected. "I need a mobile generator at Mercy Hospital now." His voice was a command, not a request. On the other end, his most trusted lieutenant didn't ask why, only answered, "On the way, boss." Roman hung up, immediately dialing again. This time, his voice softened, the edge of desperation leaking through. "Dr. Shaw, it's DeLuca. I saved your life once. Time to return the favor. Get to Mercy Hospital. Bring your team." The doctor hesitated, his voice crackling with confusion. "Roman, No excuses," Roman snapped. "A woman's dying. You have 15 minutes. He ended the call, breathing hard. The rain outside pounded harder, thunder shaking the building like the heavens were keeping count. Through the glass, he could see Florina's body trembling faintly now. A doctor pressed a hand to her chest, performing compressions. Another checked the failing monitors. Roman's hand curled into a fist. He couldn't stand still. Every part of him screamed to go to her, but he knew one wrong move could destroy everything. Instead, he turned toward the corridor, pacing like a caged beast. The hallway buzzed with chaos. Orderlies rushing with flashlights, doctors shouting, phones ringing off dead lines. In the distance, he could hear the faint wail of sirens. His backup was coming. A nurse stumbled toward him, nearly slipping on the wet tiles. "Mr. DeLuca," she gasped. "We're trying, but her vitals—" "Try harder," he cut in, his voice like steel. "She doesn't die tonight." The nurse nodded shakily and ran back inside. Roman leaned against the cold wall, his drenched hair falling across his forehead. His chest ached as flashes of the past returned again. The way Florina used to smile when she caught him staring. The way her fingers used to trace the scars on his knuckles, whispering that even broken things could still be loved. He had thrown that away. And now, fate had thrown it back in his face. Minutes crawled by, each second feeling like an eternity. Then, outside, the sound of screeching tires broke through the storm. Roman's men had arrived. He ran toward the entrance, his shoes splashing through puddles. Vince jumped out of the van, shouting over the wind. "Boss, got the generator and a portable power rig. Shaw's 5 minutes out." Roman nodded once. "Get it inside. I want light in that room now." His men moved like soldiers, hauling heavy equipment through the hospital halls. Wires snaked across the floor, sparks flying as they connected cables. For a brief second, darkness hung like a shroud. Then, light, blinding, white, alive. The generator roared to life, electricity crackling through the air. Roman turned immediately back toward the operating room. Through the glass, he saw the monitors blink back on, their rhythmic beeps returning. Doctors scrambled to stabilize her. "She's responding!" someone shouted. Relief hit him like a wave, but it was fragile, fleeting. Florina's body was still limp, her chest rising shallowly. Her skin looked almost translucent. Roman pressed a hand to the glass, whispering so quietly only he could hear. "Stay with me, little dove. Don't go where I can't follow." The door behind him opened. Dr. Shaw rushed in, still wearing his raincoat, his expression grim but focused. "Where is she?" he asked sharply. Roman motioned toward the room. "Inside. They're losing her and the baby." Shaw glanced through the glass, assessing in seconds what most couldn't in minutes. "We'll need to operate now," he said. "The child's in distress, but it's a high-risk procedure. One wrong move and—" Roman cut him off, his voice cracking. Just do it. Shaw's eyes met his. I'll need your consent. She's unconscious. And legally, I can't move forward without it. Roman hesitated for a fraction of a second, staring through the glass at the woman he'd once loved and destroyed. His throat tightened. You have it, he whispered. The doctor nodded, signalling his team. Nurses rushed to sterilize instruments, one of them glancing nervously at Roman's blood-stained shirt and cold expression. Prep her now, Shaw barked. Roman watched as they worked, every motion inside that room reflected in the glass like a haunting mirror. He stood motionless, yet his heart beat with wild urgency. Outside, lightning struck again, lighting the hallway with blinding white. Then, for the briefest moment, Florina's eyes fluttered open. Through the storm of lights and motion, Roman saw it, the faintest spark of life. Her lips moved weakly, whispering something no one could hear. He pressed closer to the glass, desperate to catch her words. What? He whispered, but she was gone again, swallowed by anesthesia. His chest constricted painfully, as if she had spoken his name one last time. Dr. Shaw turned from the operating table, his voice low but steady. We can save her, he said, eyes meeting Roman's through the glass. But the baby's heart rate is collapsing. We'll need your consent for a double-risk surgery, one that might save one life, but not both. Roman's fingers tightened against the window pane, the storm screaming outside. For the first time in his life, he didn't know which command to give. For a long moment, the world went silent. The storm outside was still raging, lightning flashing across the hospital walls. But inside Roman DeLuca's chest, there was nothing. No sound, no movement, just the weight of a decision that could break him forever. The consent form trembled in his hands, a thin sheet of paper that suddenly felt heavier than the years of blood and empire he had built. The ink bled faintly at the corner, as rainwater from his sleeve dripped onto the page. He had faced countless choices. Who lived? Who died? Which kingdom fell? But none had ever made his hands shake like this. One signature, one moment, one woman whose life now hung in his ink. His eyes moved over her name, Florina Evans, written in neat, fragile handwriting at the top. It looked ghostly, fading under the sterile light. Mr. DeLuca, Dr. Shaw's voice pressed, urgent but quiet. If we delay even another minute, she'll be gone. Both of them. Roman looked up slowly, his eyes hollow yet burning. Do it, he said. The words came out raw, like gravel. The pen scratched across the paper, his signature dark and jagged like a wound reopened. He didn't even finish before thrusting it toward the surgeon. Now! Save her! Shaw didn't waste another breath. He turned, barking orders as the team rushed into action. Roman stepped back, the clipboard slipping from his grip, landing on the floor with a hollow thud that echoed like a gunshot in the sterile corridor. Through the glass, the operating room burst into motion. Nurses moved like ghosts under the white lights, gloved hands darting between trays and wires. The machines hummed weakly, their rhythmic sounds keeping fragile time with the storm. Roman stood motionless, drenched and unblinking, his reflection overlapping hers in the glass, his dark suit and her pale skin blending like two halves of a tragedy. Every flash of lightning revealed fragments of her, the delicate curve of her face, the rise and fall of her chest, the life he had destroyed and now begged the universe to return. He could hear faint echoes from inside the room, terms he barely understood. BP dropping, heart rate unstable. We're losing oxygen. But they all translated to one truth. She was slipping away. His fingers pressed against the glass until his knuckles turned white. He wanted to break it, to storm in and rip death away from her, but all he could do was stand there, watching her fight, while his past devoured him. His mind spiraled back, Through the nights, she'd waited for him to come home. The morning she'd smiled at him like he wasn't a monster. The moment she told him she was pregnant, hope trembling in her voice. He remembered the rage that blinded him, the disbelief that she could love him selflessly. "You're lying," he had told her then, voice like steel. "You want to chain me with a child that's not mine." Her tears had fallen fast, but she didn't fight back. She just whispered, "I only ever wanted you to stay." He had walked away from that whisper like it meant nothing. Now it was all he could hear. Inside, the doctor's voice cut through the air. "Scalpel! We're going in." Roman's stomach turned. He could barely breathe. Blood pooled on the surgical drape, hers, and it hit him like an avalanche of guilt. That blood was life, the same warmth that once rested beneath his palm when he held her. The same heart he had broken. The same heart that now needed his strength to survive. Then it happened. The monitor flatlined. The sound was shrill, final, merciless. For a split second, no one moved. Roman's world collapsed into that single tone, echoing louder than the thunder outside. Something inside him tore open, wild and feral. He didn't think, he acted. The doors burst open as he shoved past two nurses, storming into the room. "Don't you dare stop!" he shouted, his voice slicing through the stunned silence. "Use my plasma. Use anything. Just save her." The staff froze. One of the surgeons turned, his voice trembling. "Mr. Luca, it's experimental. We can't risk." Roman's eyes blazed with something unholy. "So was loving her," he said, his voice deadly calm. For a moment, even the storm seemed to pause. Shaw stared at him, then at Florina, then gave a single nod. "Prep the transfusion." Nurses scrambled. Roman tore off his coat, unbuttoned his sleeve, and thrust his arm out. "Do it." The needle bit into his vein. Dark blood filled the line, coursing through the clear tubing like a silent vow. As his blood flowed into her veins, Roman's gaze never left her face. Her lips were pale, almost blue, but there was still something about her, something untamed, something that refused to die. He felt his own pulse racing, each beat sinking with the slow, uncertain flicker of the monitor. He remembered the first time he'd held her hand, how she said his name like it meant warmth instead of danger. And now, as his blood became her lifeline, he realized he had never truly let her go. Minutes stretched into eternity. The storm outside seemed to ease, replaced by the low hum of the generator. The doctor called out, "Heart, rhythm, faint, wait, wait." Roman's chest tightened. The line on the monitor wavered, flickered, then flat again. His jaw clenched. "Keep going," he barked. Shaw's team worked furiously, sweat dripping down their faces. "More plasma," a nurse shouted. Roman's vision blurred from the loss of blood, but he didn't flinch. "Take it," he muttered through gritted teeth. "Take all of it if you have to." For once in his life, his empire, his power, his money meant nothing. None of it could bargain with death. Only his blood, his life, was left to offer. As the colour slowly returned to her cheeks, a tear escaped his eye, burning as it fell. "Come back to me, Florina," he whispered. "Don't make me live in this world without you." Then, faintly, the monitor let out a soft beep. Once, then again. The sound was weak, uncertain, but it was there. Shaw's head snapped up. "We have a rhythm," he shouted. The team moved faster now, controlled, focused. Roman sagged slightly, breath trembling, his strength waning, but his soul clinging to hope. The monitor beeped again, stronger this time, steadier. The room exhaled in unison. Roman watched her chest rise, shallow but sure. Relief flooded him, raw and violent. His knees nearly buckled, and he caught himself on the edge of the table. Shaw looked up at him, his voice softer now. "She's not out of danger yet." But she's fighting. Roman nodded once, unable to speak. His gaze locked on her. Florina, the woman who had once been his weakness, now the only thing anchoring him to life. Outside, thunder rolled again, a low, distant growl. The storm hadn't ended. It had only paused. Roman turned back toward the glass, eyes fixed on her faintly moving chest. The monitor beeped again, faint, then stronger. A fragile heartbeat of love resurrected by a man who'd once buried his own. And yet, deep inside, he knew fate wasn't done testing him. The night bled slowly into dawn. Outside, the storm that had once screamed across the city now whispered like a tired secret, its last raindrops tapping softly against the window pane. Inside the hospital room, time had forgotten how to move. The only sound was the faint rhythm of the heart monitor, steady but fragile, each beep an echo of survival. The fluorescent lights dimmed slightly, their glow wrapping the space in a silvery haze. Roman DeLuca sat in silence, his body slumped in the chair beside her bed, the shadows of exhaustion etched beneath his eyes. A blood-stained bandage wrapped around his arm, a stark reminder of the night he had bled for her. His tailored suit jacket was discarded on the floor, his shirt half open, his chest rising with shallow, weary breaths. He hadn't moved for hours. Every few minutes, his gaze flicked the monitor, terrified it might fall silent again. The empire outside, his meetings, his men, his reputation, didn't exist anymore. There was only this small room, this woman, and the fragile thread that still tied her to him. Her skin looked ghostly under the hospital light, and yet to him, she was the only thing that looked alive. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his fingers brushing against hers where her hand rested limp on the white sheet. Then, movement. The faintest flutter beneath her eyelids. Roman froze, his breath catching in his throat. Her lashes trembled again. Like the first ripple across a still lake. He rose instantly, the chair scraping the floor quietly behind him. Florina. He whispered her name, as if afraid it might vanish if spoken too loud. Her lips parted slightly, drawing in a shallow breath. Her fingers twitched against the sheet. He reached for her hand, hesitant at first, the calluses on his palm grazing her delicate skin. Her lashes lifted slowly, revealing those familiar brown eyes, faint, tired, but alive. Confusion flickered in her gaze as she scanned the room. Her voice was hoarse, barely audible. "Why are you here?" The question was simple, but it landed like a blade between them. Roman's throat tightened. For a second, he couldn't find words. How could he explain the guilt clawing at his soul? His voice finally broke through the silence, rough and low, each word trembling with a truth he had buried for too long. "Because I should have never left," he said. Her eyes shimmered, tears gathering like glass under the dim light. "You called me a liar," she whispered, her voice fragile, her chest rising unevenly. "You said the baby wasn't yours." The words hit him harder than any bullet could. Roman's jaw clenched, shame burning deep beneath his ribs. He lowered his head, unable to meet her gaze. The memory of that night returned like smoke. His own rage, his cruelty, her tears, her silence. "I was wrong," he murmured, the admission scraped through his throat like broken glass. "I was so damn wrong." For a long moment, neither of them moved. Only the monitor filled the silence, its steady beeping like a reminder that they were both still here, still breathing. His hand inched forward, trembling slightly. He hesitated just before touching her, afraid that one wrong move could shatter what fragile peace hung between them. Slowly, he slid his fingers beneath hers, feeling the faint warmth of her skin, the pulse of her life beneath his thumb. It was the same warmth he once took for granted, now sacred. Her fingers tensed, as if unsure, then softened, curling weakly into his palm. Roman exhaled shakily, his thumb brushing small circles against her knuckles. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said quietly, his voice trembling with restraint. I couldn't let you go again, not like that." His words lingered in the air, heavy with the ghosts of everything unsaid. Her lips trembled. "You left me when I needed you most," she whispered, pain threading through her voice. He flinched. "I know," he said, his voice thick with regret. "And I've hated myself every day since. Every night I closed my eyes and saw your face, and I told myself it was too late." She turned her head slightly toward him, the faint light catching the tears that spilled down her cheeks. "Why now?" she asked softly. "Why did it take me dying for you to remember you loved me?" He swallowed hard, the lump in his throat suffocating. "Because I didn't know how to love you right," he admitted. "I thought strength meant control. I thought love made me weak. But the moment I saw you slipping away," he trailed off, his voice breaking, "it was the only moment I've ever been truly afraid." Florina's hand moved slightly, her thumb brushing against the back of his hand, weak but deliberate. Her voice quivered. "You were always afraid to feel." Roman's lips curved in a painful half-smile. "Not anymore," he whispered. He leaned closer, the distance between them vanishing slowly, his breath warm against her cheek. "I never stopped loving you, Florina, even when I tried to bury it under everything I became. You were the only thing that ever felt real." Her breath hitched. She wanted to speak, but her throat caught on emotion. The air between them thickened, years of pain, longing, and what-ifs hanging like ghosts. For the first time in so long, their silence wasn't empty. It was heavy with understanding. Their fingers intertwined, trembling but steady, the pulse of two broken hearts sinking again. Then, just as the moment began to settle, the door creaked open quietly. Roman's head snapped toward it, his instincts sharp even in tenderness. A nurse stepped in, her shoes squeaking softly on the linoleum. She was holding something, a bundle wrapped in white cloth, small and fragile. The sound came before the sight, a faint, newborn cry slicing through the hush of the room. Roman froze. Florina's eyes widened, her breath catching. The nurse smiled softly, unaware of the tension that now flooded the air. "He's awake," she said gently. "Your son." Roman's world tilted. For a second, he couldn't breathe. His gaze fell to the tiny face nestled in the nurse's arms. The smallest thing he had ever seen, yet somehow it carried his entire world. The baby's skin was pale, soft, his tiny fingers curling as if reaching for something unseen. The nurse stepped closer, her voice quiet. "He's been asking for you, in his own little way." Florina's trembling hand reached toward the baby, but her strength faltered. Roman stepped forward instinctively, his body moving before his mind could process it. The nurse hesitated only a moment before placing the child into his arms. The weight was impossibly light, yet it made Roman's chest ache as if he'd been struck. The baby blinked slowly, his tiny lips parting in a faint coo, eyes fluttering open just enough for Roman to see it, the same deep hazel colour as his own. Something inside him broke open then, not like the shattering of glass, but like chains snapping after years of rust. His vision blurred. He looked down at the baby, then at Florina and whispered, "He's mine." Florina's tears spilled silently. "He always was." Roman's hand shook as he cradled the boy closer, his thumb tracing the baby's small cheek. The warmth, the heartbeat. It was real, undeniable. His son. The word felt foreign, yet sacred on his tongue. All the years he'd chased power, and here it was, the one thing that truly mattered, small enough to fit in his arms, fragile enough to break his entire world apart again. He turned toward Florina, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't deserve either of you." She smiled faintly, weak but radiant. Then, earn us. Her words hit him like a vow. Roman looked at her, then at their son, his heart torn between guilt and wonder. For the first time, he didn't know what came next. The air in the room felt heavier, charged with something unspoken, hope tangled with fear. The baby stirred again, a soft cry escaping his lips, and the sound wrapped around Roman like a promise. He stepped closer to the bed, lowering the child into Florina's arms. Their hands brushed, their eyes met, and for a moment, time stood still. The heart monitor beeped softly beside them, each pulse echoing the rhythm of a love reborn, but not yet healed. As Roman leaned closer, his forehead brushing hers, a shadow flickered at the edge of the glass window, someone watching from the corridor, unseen but still. Roman's jaw tensed. The storm might have ended outside, but inside his world, another was quietly beginning. The world seemed to hold its breath as Roman stared at the small bundle in his arms. The faint hum of hospital machines, the soft drip of rain still sliding down the window, the distant echo of footsteps in the hallway, all of it faded into nothing. There was only the sound of his son's soft whimpers, tiny breaths fluttering like the wings of something new and fragile. The baby's fingers curled and uncurled against the fabric of the blanket, clutching air as if already reaching for him. Roman's gaze locked on the child's eyes. Grey, stormy, sharp. His eyes. The realization hit him like a pulse of lightning, striking through every wall he had ever built. For a moment, he couldn't speak. His mouth opened, but no sound came. The empire he ruled, the men who feared him, the enemies who whispered his name in dread, none of that mattered. The world outside this room could burn and he wouldn't move. Everything he was, every piece of him, was now in the fragile weight of that child, his son. Florina's weak voice broke the silence, a trembling whisper that carried every ounce of truth she'd once been denied the chance to say. "He's yours." The words landed soft but heavy, wrapping around his heart and squeezing until he couldn't breathe. Roman looked at her, his throat tightening. She was pale, almost translucent against the white sheets, but her eyes, though tired, held a quiet strength that cut deeper than any wound. "I wanted to tell you," she continued, her voice trembling like glass about to break, "but you never gave me a chance." Roman's jaw tensed. Guilt surged through him in hot, burning waves. Every moment he had turned away, every cruel word, every assumption, it all clawed back into his mind, leaving no place to hide. He stared at her, unable to find a single word strong enough to bridge the wreckage between them. His voice finally broke, hoarse and heavy. "And yet," he said, his hand trembling as he held the baby closer, "when you were dying, you still listed my name." Florina's lips parted, her breath catching, her eyes filled with tears that she no longer had the strength to hide. "Because no matter how much I hated you," she whispered, "part of me still hoped you'd come." Her words struck him like a blade, slicing through every layer of armor he'd built. Roman looked away for a moment, blinking against the sting in his eyes. The baby squirmed slightly in his arms, letting out a soft, uneven cry that shattered what little control he still had left. Roman's chest tightened. His lips parted in a trembling exhale. Without thinking, he pulled the baby closer, resting his chin gently against the child's head. The scent, warm, pure and new, hit him with the force of something divine and unfamiliar. He closed his eyes, his voice breaking into a whisper. "You waited for me," he said, though it wasn't clear if he was speaking to Florina or the tiny life he now held. "After everything I did, you still waited." The child's cries softened, replaced by small, peaceful breaths. Roman looked down again, tears gathering along his lashes. His heart ached in ways it hadn't in years, raw, aching, human. For the first time, he smiled. but the smile came through tears, trembling, fragile, real. His hand brushed over the baby's tiny cheek, tracing the softness, memorizing it. He had bled for power, killed for survival, destroyed for control. Yet this small heartbeat in his arms undid him completely. Florina watched him, her lips curving into the faintest ghost of a smile. Her voice was weak, but laced with wonder. "You look different." He turned toward her slowly. "Maybe I am," he murmured. "You used to hold everything like it would break you," she said, her eyes fluttering. "Now you hold him like he could save you." Roman's chest tightened again, her words wrapping around him like chains of truth. "Maybe he already has," he said softly. For a moment, silence filled the room. A silence that didn't hurt, but healed. The rain outside slowed to a drizzle, the clouds beginning to fade into faint streaks of grey dawn. The storm had passed, but its echo still lingered in the hollow corners of Roman's heart. He turned back to Florina, his voice low. "What's his name?" She hesitated, blinking slowly, exhaustion washing over her. I didn't name him," she whispered faintly. "I didn't know if—" Her voice faltered, the weight of what almost was settling in her throat. Roman's gaze softened. "Then we'll name him together," he said gently, brushing a strand of damp hair from her forehead. "You and me." Her lips curved faintly. "Together," she echoed, her eyelids fluttering as if the word itself was too heavy to hold. Roman adjusted the baby in his arms, cradling him close, the small heartbeat pressing against his chest. "He's strong," he whispered. "He'll have your heart, and maybe a little of my madness." A faint laugh escaped Florina's lips, weak but real. "Poor thing," she breathed. Roman smiled softly, the corner of his mouth twitching with an ache he couldn't name. He lowered the baby gently onto her chest, letting her feel the warmth of their son against her heart. Florina's hands trembled as she touched him, her fingers tracing the tiny curve of his cheek. The baby stirred, eyes opening just enough to meet hers, and for a fleeting second the world stood still. Roman watched them, his throat closing around a surge of emotion too big to contain. It was a sight he never thought he'd see. Life born from chaos, love resurrected from ruin. Minnie Cliffhanger stirred softly in the quiet, a faint flicker on the monitor, too subtle to notice at first. Florina exhaled, her hand weakly clutching at Roman's sleeve. "Promise me," she whispered, voice fading. "If something happens to me—" He cut her off instantly, his tone sharp but trembling. "Don't." His eyes darkened. "Nothing's going to happen to you." Her gaze lingered on him, soft but knowing. "You can't control everything," she said faintly. Roman swallowed hard, his jaw clenching. "Watch me." But even as he said it, his gaze flicked to the monitor again, and his stomach twisted. Her heart rate jumped suddenly, numbers flickering erratically on the screen. The steady beeping turned rapid, frantic. "Florina," he whispered, leaning closer. Her lips parted, breath uneven, her skin paling fast. "Something's wrong," she murmured weakly, her body tensing as the monitors screamed in alarm. Roman's heart dropped. "No, no, no," he breathed, standing up, pressing the call button violently. The baby in his arms began to cry. Nurses rushed in, a flurry of motion and panic, machines sparking, lights flickering. The baby's cry rose higher, echoing through the chaos like a fragile plea. Roman stood frozen for a heartbeat, torn between holding his son and grabbing her hand. Then he moved, placing the baby safely into the nurse's arms, before rushing to Florina's side. "Fight!" he shouted. "Florina, fight!" But her eyes were closing, her breath shallow, her body trembling under the weight of machines trying to pull her back. The world spun, alarms blaring, people shouting, everything collapsing into noise and fear. And in that blur of chaos, Roman's heart broke all over again. As doctors swarmed around her, the baby's cries cut sharply through the chaos, high, desperate, echoing through the room. Roman turned toward the sound, tears blurring his vision. Just as the monitor gave one long, piercing flatline, then silence. The long, piercing flatline still echoed through the room, a sound that carved into the silence like a blade through glass. Roman's body locked in place, breath trapped in his chest, every instinct in him refusing to accept what that single note meant. For a second, the world blurred. White walls, flashing lights, trembling hands, and the faint scent of antiseptic. Then everything snapped back, sharp and real, as the doctors surged forward, voices overlapping in urgency. He stumbled a step closer, the baby's cries fading behind him as he turned toward the bed. "No!" he rasped, his voice breaking like a storm. "No, not again!" The doctors shouted orders, their words colliding with the noise of machines. Roman's pulse hammered in his temples, each beat screaming her name. He handed the child to the nearest nurse with shaking hands and pushed his way into the circle of chaos. "She's not leaving me again," he growled, his tone low and dangerous, but cracked with terror. His men burst through the doorway, soaked from the rain, carrying the emergency cases he'd ordered earlier. The lead surgeon glanced up, startled, as Roman barked, "Move!" before he even realised he'd spoken. The private medical team joined the hospital staff seamlessly, their motions swift, practiced, efficient. Roman caught Florina's limp hand, gripping it with a strength born of desperation. "Stay with me," he whispered, leaning closer, his forehead touching hers. "I'll give up everything. No more business, no more blood, just us. You hear me?" The chaos spun around him, monitors flashing, doctors shouting numbers, nurses rushing instruments back and forth. But all he saw was her face, pale beneath the harsh light. He remembered her laugh, soft and bright, the way she used to tilt her head when she teased him. The memory burned through the terror like a cruel kind of mercy. The surgeon's voice broke through the haze, strained but clear. "She's fading. We need more time, more stability." Roman's heart clenched. "Take mine," he murmured, his voice almost too low to hear. He bent closer, words spilling against her ear like a vow. "Then I'll give you my life until yours beats again." For a moment, nothing moved. Even the storm outside seemed to pause, as if the night itself held its breath. Roman's men stood frozen near the door, their faces pale, their loyalty rendered helpless by the sight of their unbreakable boss brought to his knees. The surgeon adjusted the monitors, his hands trembling as he worked. "We're stabilizing her rhythm," one of the nurses whispered. Roman's eyes flicked to the screen. The jagged lines wavered, then began to find a rhythm again, a faint, fragile pulse. He closed his eyes, a shudder tearing through him. The room filled with muted relief, the sharp edges of panic softening into cautious hope. The doctors continued their work, sweat glistening on their foreheads, their focus unwavering. Roman didn't let go of her hand, his thumb tracing circles against her cold skin as if the motion alone could call her back. "You fight, Florina," he breathed, his voice a mixture of command and prayer. "You always fight." The surgeon exhaled, tension bleeding from his shoulders. "She's holding," he said finally, glancing up at Roman. "But she needs rest. She's stable, for now." The words sank into Roman's chest, like light breaking through a dark ocean. He looked down at her, at the fragile rise and fall of her chest, and a single tear slid down his face, disappearing into the corner of his mouth. Around him, the chaos began to fade into quiet efficiency. The machines hummed steadily, the scent of iron and antiseptic mingling in the air. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. his hand trembling. "You came back to me," he whispered. In the corner, the nurse held his son, the child's cries softening, as if sensing the fragile peace that had settled over the room. Roman turned slightly, his gaze flicking toward them, and something inside him shifted. A realization that life, fragile and defiant, had refused to let go. The surgeon straightened, exhaustion shadowing his eyes. "We'll monitor her closely," he said, his voice low. "She's alive, but unconscious. The next few hours will decide everything." Roman nodded slowly, unable to trust his voice. He moved to the bedside, sinking into the chair, his body heavy with everything he had fought and lost. His fingers still wrapped around hers, unwilling to let go. Outside, dawn crept over the horizon, the faintest light breaking through the storm clouds. And in that fragile glow, amidst the quiet hum of machines and the rhythmic beat of two hearts barely hanging on, Roman DeLuca, killer, king, sinner, let the world fall away, whispering to the woman who could still save him from himself. The heart monitor held steady, beeping in slow, deliberate rhythm. She was alive, but she didn't wake. The first light of dawn crept through the hospital blinds like a hesitant promise, spilling golden warmth across the sterile walls that had held so much darkness hours before. The storm had finally broken, leaving behind a silence so fragile that even the hum of machines sounded sacred. Roman sat beside Florina's bed, his broad shoulders slumped, exhaustion carving shadows beneath his eyes. His once perfect suit was wrinkled, stained with blood that wasn't all his, but none of that mattered anymore. In his arms rested their son, wrapped in a thin white blanket, his small chest rising and falling with perfect rhythm. For the first time in years, Roman DeLuca looked human, no longer the man the world feared, but a man reborn through loss, love, and the kind of fear that money and power could never silence. He stared at her sleeping form, memorizing every detail, the faint flutter of her lashes, the colour returning slowly to her cheeks, the subtle movement of her chest as her heart fought its way back to life. The steady beep of the monitor beside her was the most beautiful sound he'd ever heard. The baby stirred slightly, and Roman's gaze softened, his thumb brushing over the child's tiny hand. He'd never believed in miracles, but this one had his eyes and her heartbeat. Outside, the city that once screamed his name now lay quiet beneath the dawn, and for the first time, he felt like he didn't own it anymore. It no longer owned him. The door creaked softly as a nurse peeked in, checking vitals before retreating wordlessly, sensing that this moment was not meant to be disturbed. Roman leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, whispering something only the sleeping could hear. "You fought me. You fought death. And you won." His voice trembled, rough with sleeplessness and emotion. The baby shifted, letting out a small sigh, and Roman chuckled quietly, a sound foreign to his own ears. "You've got her spirit," he whispered to his son. "God help me if you ever get her temper." The humour cracked through his exhaustion like sunlight through storm clouds. He looked at Florina again, and for a second, time held still. Then a soft sound escaped her lips, a faint exhale followed by a small movement of her fingers. Roman froze. His heart stopped in his chest, his eyes widening as those same fragile fingers twitched again, slow, deliberate. "Florina?" His voice was barely a breath. Her eyes fluttered open, hazy at first, unfocused. Then they found him. Confusion flickered, then recognition bloomed, followed by something softer, something that felt like peace. "Roman," she whispered, her voice rasping like wind brushing through dry leaves. He leaned forward instantly, every ounce of composure vanishing. "You made it," he said, his words breaking mid-sentence, a rough laugh caught between relief and disbelief. She blinked, her gaze moving weakly toward the bundle in his arms. "The baby!" Her tone trembled with fear and hope. Roman's expression softened completely. "He's right here," he said, turning slightly so she could see. "Perfect. Just like you." Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. Her lips curved faintly, exhaustion painting every movement in slow motion. "You shouldn't have come back," she whispered weakly, her voice fading like the last echo of a dream. Roman's chest tightened, his jaw clenching as he reached out, brushing her cheek with his thumb. "I never left," he said, and the simplicity of those 3 words carried the weight of everything he'd broken and everything he would spend forever trying to fix. She stared at him, eyes glistening, 1,000 memories flickering between them without a word. The silence that followed wasn't cold. It was full, thick with everything they hadn't said, every apology too late, every love too deep to die. A single tear slipped down her temple, and Roman bent forward, pressing his lips gently against her forehead. "I'll spend the rest of my life making this right," he murmured, his voice low, breaking with emotion. "No more lies, no more running." She smiled faintly, her breath shaky but alive. Her hand lifted weakly, trembling as her fingers found his face. "Then, start by holding your son," she whispered. Her touch lingered against his cheek, soft as dawnlight, her eyes shining not with pain, but something purer. Trust. For a moment, Roman couldn't move. He looked down at the baby, then back at her, and for the first time since he'd built his empire, he felt small, in awe of something he couldn't command, couldn't own, could only love. He placed the baby gently into her arms, helping her guide the fragile bundle against her chest. The sight undid him. Florina looked down at their son, her tears falling onto the baby's blanket, her lips parting in a quiet, trembling laugh that sounded like the first note of a forgotten song. "He's beautiful," she whispered. Roman nodded, his voice caught somewhere between pride and heartbreak. "He is. He's everything we should have been." The baby made a soft cooing sound, as if responding, and the moment wrapped around them like light after a storm. The world outside slowly brightened, sun rays spilling across the room, washing away the greyness of night. The golden glow touched their faces, catching the faint shimmer of tears still clinging to their skin. Roman's hand found Florina's again, fingers interlocking gently. "No more darkness," he said quietly. "Not for us." She turned her head slightly, meeting his gaze. "Then don't go back to it," she whispered. "Not ever." Roman smiled faintly, his eyes soft but steady. "I won't. You both are my world now." For a moment, neither spoke, content in the fragile peace that had once seemed impossible. The monitor beeped steadily, the soft rhythm of her heartbeat syncing with the small steady breaths of their child. The hospital room, once filled with chaos and death, now glowed with quiet life. Outside, the storm clouds had cleared completely, leaving a horizon painted in gold and rose. Roman exhaled slowly, his thumb tracing lazy circles against her hand. "You once told me," he said softly, "that one day I'd regret letting you go." Her lips curved faintly. "Do you?" He smiled through the ache in his throat. Every breath since that night. Her tears broke again, silent and shining. "Then don't waste this one," she whispered. He leaned in, kissing her forehead once more, his breath mingling with hers. "Never again," he promised. And for once his words weren't armor, they were truth. The baby stirred between them, his tiny hand curling around one of Roman's fingers. Florina smiled weakly. "He already loves you," she murmured. Roman swallowed hard, blinking away the emotion clawing up his chest. Then I'll make sure he never fears me, he said quietly. They stayed like that, mother, father, child, bathed in the soft gold of morning, the silence holding more meaning than words ever could. The man who had ruled the night was finally at peace in the light, and as he held them both close, Roman realized that sometimes redemption doesn't roar. It whispers, fragile and slow, like the breaking of dawn. The city outside stirred to life, unaware that the man it once feared had finally found something stronger than power. Love had broken his curse, and in its place it had built something new. He looked at them, his family, and felt the rarest thing of all: peace. The sun rose higher, flooding the room in brilliance, and Roman closed his eyes, pressing his forehead gently against hers, whispering the vow that would carry him for the rest of his life. No more blood, no more loss, only you, only us. Florina's hand tightened around his, the babies breathing soft and steady between them, and for the first time, Roman DeLuca smiled, like a man who had nothing left to prove. Sometimes the second chance you beg for is the one you almost let die. When power failed, love didn't. He gave his blood, his name, and his soul to the woman he once destroyed, proving that even the coldest hearts can bleed for love. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more tales where heartbreak meets redemption, only on Heart Woven Tales.